You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to The Greeks Gridiron, and a happy Friday to you all. We are coming off the heels of a Thursday night matchup where we picked the right winner, Denver Broncos getting the win, absolutely smashing on the New Orleans Saints, but we've got plenty of games to discuss, 14 more to go through for Week 7 of the NFL, including a doubleheader on Monday night. Plenty of football to talk and discuss. Dive into that comment section down below. Predict these games along with me. Let me hear your thoughts. Remember, we're just picking winners straight up here. Let me know who you got. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? But we dive in, starting first with the opening contest on Sunday, bright and early from London. We have the New England Patriots taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, who opted to stay out there, obviously, playing back-to-back weeks in London. And I've got to say, this game has a lot of intrigue going into it because, of course, there's a situation surrounding the Jaguars being 1-5 right now and just the current state of the team as they are dead last in the AFC right now, not where I think this team anticipated being. And then you have the Patriots, who started a rookie quarterback in Drake May last week and honestly got some pretty promising results. The offense is still not quite where it needs to be. There were a ton of turnovers. They're still missing some key guys at this current moment here, but I will say that if there was not any hope about this Patriots offense prior to last week, you can walk away from that 3-touchdown performance from Drake May and at least see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel here. So, looking at this game here, first thing that I'm looking at, the Patriots offensive line. It has not been great. They're ranked 32nd in pressure rate allowed this season at 48.1%. They are a whopping about 6% higher than the team behind them in second, and they've also allowed the second most sacks this season. Now, thankfully, Jacksonville, despite the talent that they have on their defensive line, is third worst in pressure rate right now, and they're middle of the league in sacks, sitting on 14. So I'll be very interested in seeing how this group holds up. Verdarian Lowe is not expected to play in this game, so you can keep that in mind already. That's one knock to the team's offense, coupled with the fact that there's also the potential that there's no Ramondre Stevenson in the backfield again for the Patriots, as he did not participate in practice both Wednesday and Thursday. So again, injury concerns holding back how good I really feel about this Patriots offense, especially going overseas to meet a Jacksonville Jaguars team that's already been in London for the last week now and is well acclimated to being on the other side of the world at this moment here. Now, Drake May, like I mentioned, versus the Texans, 243 yards. He had 3 touchdowns, couple of picks, about 60% completion percentage. Average time to throw was about 3 seconds, sitting just under. Jacksonville right now, currently the worst passing defense in the league, and something I definitely think is worth taking note of. At 276 yards per game, they've also allowed a league-high 14 passing touchdowns, and per next-gen stats, the Jaguars rank number 32 in overall pass defense efficiency. There is a good chance that we potentially see some points, because when you take a look at those numbers on Jacksonville's end, and also the fact that the Patriots have found themselves in a really bad spot defensively this year between injuries and also arrests and things just not really going their way on the defensive side of the ball. There is a chance that we see both these teams move at a pretty effective clip, especially through the air, despite being the fact that we're in London, and typically for the most part these games don't get too crazy. Obviously the Bears had a bit of fun last week with the Jaguars in London, but different team going up against the Patriots here. But I do think that with just how bad they have been defending the pass, Drake May, after a good start last week against a far better defense in my opinion, I think there's a shot that we see some fireworks through the air. Now, Jacksonville, and this is something that this is me just kind of harping on this more than anything, that I really hope they eventually just kind of lean into some more here. They're currently averaging the 4th lowest rushing attempts per game right now. Despite that, Tank Bigsby, who's expected to get the start again for the team, sitting on a whopping 7.6 yards per attempt so far this season. He has been running the football extremely effectively, and I wish Jacksonville would just opt to lean into the run a little bit more here. You're going up against the Patriots defense that's tied for 13 in rushing yards per attempt allowed, 13th in run stuff rate, 14th in rushing yards per game total allowed. You have a good opportunity to get the ball moving on the ground and maybe balance out your offense a little bit. I understand there's so much much right now being invested into the passing game with Trevor Lawrence's contract and all the moves you made to beef up the wide receiver room this offseason. But if you're finding success on the ground, and I know that maybe Tank Bigsby's numbers are inflated a little bit because he's had some big performances and maybe a few big runs here and there, lean into that. Maybe he gets you more of that. Tank Bigsby leads the league in yards per attempt right now. Lean into that and see if it's maybe just a boomer bust scenario, or maybe there is something there to be had, and just try focusing on the run a little bit more. Like, come on, Jacksonville. It's right there in front of you. At least give it an opportunity. You're not giving it a true chance. Again, 4th lowest in rushing attempts per game right now across the league out of the 32 teams there. Like, just run the football a little bit more. See what happens. You have a good chance to do so against a fairly weak defensive front over there in New England. Now, as for who I think is going to win this game here, it's a little bit tough because both these teams are in a really bad way right now. Both teams only have a single win. Both teams have 5 losses. You have the Jaguars, who are currently ranked as the number 16 seed in the AFC right now, and the Patriots are right in front of them at number 15. They're both bottom-of-the-barrel franchises. That all being said, the injury concerns with New England are what are kind of really scaring me away right now, with just so many people that have been limited in practice so far the first couple of days between Wednesday and Thursday, and then of course Gridiron Lowe's out. Ramondre Stevenson hasn't even practiced to this point as of me recording for the first 2 days of practice, which leads me to believe he's probably going to miss the game again, and that seems to be the consensus, especially even around the New England area. People don't really seem to be expecting him to play. With the amount of injuries they're dealing with going overseas, you're going up against a Jaguars team that's been out there. I like Jacksonville, but I again think the Patriots do, with Drake May under center now, maybe put up a little bit of a fight. They hang around, but just not quite enough to get the job done. So I'll take Jacksonville 26-21, but I think the Patriots can hang in there. I also think the door is open for an upset in this one. This is one of my least confident picks here. It was one of the last ones I finally sat down and decided on, but I will say that I do think the Jaguars, between talent and just circumstance of having been out there now for the last week, healthier roster, they should be getting the victory here. Should be, keyword. Now, moving into the 1 o'clock window now. First game we're going to look at is going to be an NFC East clash, and we're looking at the Philadelphia Eagles heading into New York to take on the Giants. For the Giants to come out successful in this game here, I think the first thing they've got to look at is Saquon Barkley. He has consistently been a threat on the ground each and every single week for this Eagles team, and they've got to stack the box and get to it early and prevent him from going crazy. Per Next Gen Stats, Saquon Barkley is averaging 7.3 yards attempt versus boxes when they're packed lightly, so 6 defenders or less. New York isn't necessarily known for stacking the box against design runs, but they don't necessarily at the highest rate, according to Next Gen Stats, like to do so. So the way I see it here, you've got to go in expecting that the Eagles, especially because they've been a little bit inconsistent through the air as well. Granted, they didn't have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith for extended periods of time, but knowing that the Philadelphia Eagles have been struggling offensively, and they have a guy like Saquon who week in and week out has looked really good, get a little bit heavy with the box. Do not let Saquon Barkley just run all over you. I feel like that's one of those things where if you let him get going, you can't really stop him. He's a guy that's kind of like that snowball that starts rolling down the hill that turns more into a snow boulder and is going to run you over the rest of the game. Just do not let him get going early. Otherwise, it's going to be a game of catch up. And I don't think the Giants have what it takes in the tank to be able to do that offensively. Now, Philadelphia themselves offensively, they have got to account for Brian Burns and Azeez Ojulari. Now, obviously, Kayvon Thibodeaux put on IR. We're going to be missing him in New York for quite some time. I will say that I'm not super concerned just because Ojulari looked really good against Cincinnati. He's someone who feels like he's maybe really finding a way into his own right now, and with Brian Burns, who ranks number 10 in total pressures as an individual player this season right now, you have a good shot at seeing some serious pressure coming off the edges of that defensive line over there in New York. Now, when you look at Philadelphia as far as pass protection is concerned, 14 sacks allowed. They have the 12th highest pressure rate allowed as well, and things, again, have been a little bit rocky as far as the pass is concerned over there. These are guys that you can't sleep on. Again, just because Kayvon Thibodeaux's out, you're not sitting there, wiping sweat off your brow going, phew, that's a close one, lucky for us. Like, no, Azeez Ojulari looked pretty good in his absence last week, and that is something that Philadelphia absolutely needs to be prepared for because, again, the focus is still Brian Burns, and if Azeez Ojulari's getting open looks and he's not seeing the double teams because Brian Burns is getting on the other side, he could feast. So got to keep an eye on those pass rushers. And then, of course, the one thing that everyone is looking at right now, and it seems like he is set to return, wide receiver Malik Neighbors for the Giants. Despite missing 2 games, he currently still sits 7th in receptions, 14th in yards. He has 3 touchdowns on the year. Philadelphia right now, as far as their passing defense is concerned, they're 21st in pressure rate, they're 20th in sack rate. They've allowed the 12th most passing yards per game, and per the Next Gen stats, they currently rank 26th in overall pass defense efficiency. There is some kind of leeway being given on the Giants end in this. Left tackle Andrew Thomas, done for the season following surgery. Philadelphia could benefit from that, but Malik Neighbors, despite all the lack of talent going on around him on that New York Giants offense, there is a really good shot that he has himself another strong performance against the secondary that just has not quite been where it needs to be, despite the amount of talent that they brought in this year to kind of reinfuse the roster and get a little bit younger on that side of the football. We'll see where it stands, but Malik Neighbors is definitely somebody I'm keeping an eye on because I'm fully expecting 10 targets this way, fully expecting it. This is a Giants offense that has sorely missed him in the 2 games that he's been out. So I expect them to go right back at it and just start feeding him the football again because he was leading the league in targets and he had already missed a single game before missing the second game. So it's one of those things where it's inevitable that Neighbors is going to get the football here, and the Giants have clearly built that offense around him. As for who I think is going to win, this game being in New York definitely makes it a little bit more complicated, especially with just how much we've been seeing the Eagles struggle to get it done so far this season. When you see the way that they played the New Orleans Saints at home, or not at home, in New Orleans rather, and now you have obviously the game last week as well against Cleveland. Things have just not been have not been as peachy keen as you would like them to be in Philadelphia. You got Nick Sirianni barking at fans over that are 10 feet away from the bench. There's a lot going on in Philly right now, and I'm a little bit worried about this pick here because it almost feels like Giants trap game type of win, but I'm gonna err on the side of Philadelphia. I'm gonna go against that gut feeling that I'm feeling because I still think that the Eagles are the better team in this situation here, and that loss of Andrew Thomas on the left side of the offensive line could be a key factor in just how much pressure and just how successful that defensive front of Philadelphia's can be in this game here and getting after Daniel Jones and making him uncomfortable. So I'll take the Eagles 22-18. This one feels like one of those weird score games where we're gonna get some oddball number like that. I feel like that happens between Philly and New York, so I'll take them 22-18 for the W. Big win in the NFC East for Philadelphia to keep those playoff hopes alive and maybe quiet some of the noise that's going on outside around them. Now, the next game we're looking at here is a lot of people touting it, game of the week, Detroit Lions heading into Minnesota to take on the Vikings. And I've got to say, there's a lot of interesting things to look at in this game here. First and foremost is going to be Detroit's pass protection going up against Minnesota's pass rush. When you look at Detroit, tied for 6th in sacks allowed at only 10 so far this season. They are 11th in time till pressure allowed. They are doing an excellent job of giving Jared Goff the time he needs, and he is not sweating too much in that pocket. But Minnesota comes in. They're tied for 3rd in sacks with 20. They're tied for 8th in pressure rate right now. They have the 2nd highest blitz rate in the league, but that could be to their detriment in this game here. The reason I say that is because Jared Goff against the blitz this year has actually been money. When you look at the numbers, 586 yards passing, 3 touchdowns to a pick, a passer rating of 128 with a 13.3 yards per attempt average, completing nearly 73% of his passes against the blitz. You've got to be careful if you're Minnesota because Jared Goff seems like he has found a rhythm, especially when a lot of guys are coming his way. He's really good at throwing into the blitz and getting it to the guy it needs to go to. Just be careful. That's all I'm saying there. But from the way things stand right now, This is going to be quite the test to see just how good Jared Goff actually is against that blitz and just how good this blitzing attack that Minnesota's deploying actually is on their end. Fun matchup there. The second thing I'm looking at is Minnesota's run defense versus the Lions' rushing attack. When you look at what Detroit has been doing on the ground this year, they love pounding the rock. It is such a gritty, blue-collared style of football that Dan Campbell has brought to this Lions team. They're 4th in yards per game. They are 9th in runs going 10 yards or more. They have the 5th lowest run stuff rate in the league, and they are ranked number 3 in overall rushing success rate with positive plays. So you look at that, going up against the Minnesota run defense that is 2nd in yards per game allowed only to the Baltimore Ravens. They're 3rd in yards per attempt allowed. They have the 2nd lowest runs of 10 plus or more yards allowed, and then they have the 4th best run stuff rate in the league. We have 2 Titans, again, colliding head-to-head, where it's going to be a matter of who is actually the best at what they're doing right now, because both of these teams in their respects are at the top of their games. I will be interested, though, with obviously the big news, Aiden Hutchinson going down. I'm sure we've all seen the clip now, snapping his fibula and his tibia, I believe. Tibia and fibula is what I'm trying to say there. Really unfortunate end to his season. Hopefully he gets back and he's good to go for the start of next season. I'm assuming that one's going to be a long one to recover from. It did not look good, just one of those freak accident type of deals. But with him out for the season, Detroit sits on only 15 sacks racked up this year as a defense, and 7.5 of those came from Hutchinson. He alone generates pressure at about 16% of his pass rushes. He's a big reason why this defense, in my opinion, especially coming up against the pass, was not flat out one of the worst units. They do struggle against the pass still. They're still allowing a ton of yards per game, but he was the reason that they're really not falling off a cliff on that side of things. So now, with him out of the equation, somebody has got to step up and step up big time. Whether it's someone like Josh Paschal or anyone else, we have got to see someone step in and fill those shoes for this defense. I don't know who it's going to be because they really have not gotten a ton of pressure and or sacks from anyone else not named Aiden Hutchinson, but it is something that the Lions have to figure out. I think there's a good shot we see some decent amount of points in this game here. I think the Lions offensively are just absolutely rolling right now, but you have the Vikings coming off a bye week, well rested, hosting the Lions. This is going to be a crazy contest. But for me, I feel like I'm so torn because in my power rankings, I have the Vikings ranked as the number 2 team in the league. But the one thing that is constantly holding me back is just my lack of true belief in what Sam Darnold can do for this team in the long run. And I'm sorry to those of you that are preaching the Sam Darnold, train and whatnot. I get it, but I'm going to have to lean the Lions on this one, and I'm going to take them 29-27 in a really fun contest. I think this is about as good of a matchup as we're going to get to this point in the season here, and it could really go either way. And the Lions going into Minnesota to get the W, in my opinion, is going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort here. But there is just a piece of me that, for whatever the reason is, I just cannot get behind Sam Darnold. If he comes into this game and really lights it up, I'll probably be able to change my opinion on that because I'm really waiting for like that signature win against a really good opponent coming in. So I feel like the Lions present that opportunity and maybe I'll feel differently, but I need a really strong performance from him in this game before I can truly buy in, because the Vikings as a whole are an absolute unit this season. And I just have this undying thing in the back of my mind about the belief or the lack thereof, I guess, in what Sam Darnold's doing right now. So I'm sorry to the Vikings fans. I'm taking the Lions 29-27. It is going to be a hell of a contest, though. Then we take a look at the Miami Dolphins heading into Indianapolis to take on the Colts here. Tua remains out. Snoop Huntley continues to be the guy under center for them. And I think we at this point have seen just how important Tua Tagovailoa is to this offense and orchestrating this offense to the level it needs to be run at to be successful. This offense in Miami has flatlined without him and looks so disjointed and discombobulated. It does not look good at all. Anthony Richardson on the other side is set to return this week. He has 3 touchdowns, 6 picks, about a 50% completion rate. I've got to say, if there was a game for him to return to, this is probably the best game for him, all things considered. Miami's defense has been hurting a bit. They're dealing with some injuries that they've been getting that just kind of have mounted the last few weeks, and culminating with the loss of Jalen Phillips is probably the toughest one here. But realistically, the way I see it right now, I just need to see Anthony Richardson protect the football. If he can protect the football, Miami is in such a bad way right now that the Colts should be coming out of this game victorious. Emphasis on the should be coming out victorious here. Indianapolis loves to run zone coverage and then just rush for. It's like the Gus Bradley defense at this point here. 86% of their plays against the pass are zone coverage plays, which is the second highest rate in the NFL. Miami, a team that leads the league in motion, both pre-snap and at the snap. With Indianapolis using so much zone, it lessens the chance of them getting caught up because you don't have a man trying to follow wherever this person's going. I feel like when you run man coverage against a lot of these high motion teams, players get either not lost, but just, especially with what Miami does and how creative they are with their motions, it's easy to accidentally lose your man because you're trying to track this guy that's moving all over the field. And Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are unfortunately not the slowest guys around. So I think with Indianapolis being a team that sits in their zones and coverage the way they do, it kind of benefits them in that aspect there. And it also forces Tyler Huntley to have to basically read the zones and find the open pockets in their defense. So I think that works out for them, in my opinion. And on top of that, Miami's run game has been flat out devastated because nobody really respects them in terms of throwing the football right now. They're 31st in rushing yards per game allowed in Indianapolis. And I will say that they have one of the worst run stuff rates in the league, and they're tied fourth most for runs of 10 yards or more allowed. But I would expect that the Colts can at least put some sort of effort against a down and out Lions, Miami Dolphins team that is in the current state that they're in. They should be able to get the win. I am not sure what the offense is going to look like. I kind of would have been okay with Joe Flacco just kind of continuing on, but it is what it is. You spent a third round selection, whatever it was, on Anthony Richardson last season. He's got to come back eventually, but I'm taking the Colts 20-13. I don't think they by any means throttle the Dolphins because the offense has not really looked the same between Joe Flacco under center and Anthony Richardson under center in Indianapolis. So I'm not exactly sure what we're going to get from this offense, coupled with the fact that there's probably a good chance Jonathan Taylor doesn't play again this week from the way things sound. I don't think this offense will be quite where it needs to be, but it should have enough to be able to beat Miami. If the Colts can't beat Miami in this situation, especially at home, then they've got some bigger issues that they need discussing. Next game we're going to look at is another exciting matchup. We have the Houston Texans heading into Green Bay to take on the Packers. CJ Stroud versus Jordan Love. That is the billing for this contest here. You look at these two quarterbacks, you throw their stats up, and you look at them just one-to-one comparing the two. Both of them with a passer rating somewhere in the 90s, averaging about 7.5 yards per attempt for both of these guys. However, CJ Stroud, a little bit more consistent with the ball, taking care of it a little bit better. He's averaging about 68% completion rate to Jordan Love's 59. And on top of that, CJ Stroud sitting on 10 touchdowns to 4 picks. He got 12 touchdowns, 6 picks from Jordan Love's end. Both of these guys are dealing the football, though. They are both able to find one of their very many talented receiving options and get the ball in the end zone. And the way I see it, this game really comes down to the quarterbacks and how they handle their opposing defenses. Now, Houston, for what it's worth, a much better team defending the pass in terms of just overall the pressure that they're able to bring with guys like Danielle Hunter and, of course, Will Anderson in what they do going after the quarterback on the edges of that defensive front. The Packers defense can be a little bit leaky at times through the air and on the ground right now. I will say that I don't think we've gotten as much of an improvement as I would have hoped out of this Packers defense this year. I think it's maybe not as bad as last year, but I would have liked to see a little bit more of a jump, all things considered, being a healthier unit and just, change a defensive coordinator. I would have hoped to see a little bit more, but both these defenses, regardless of that, are going to have their hands full. You see what the Texans bring to the table. Even without Nico Collins, you're still looking at Stephon Diggs. You're still looking at Tank Dell. You're still looking at tight end Dalton Schultz. And then on the Packers end, you got Jaden Reed. You got Romeo Doubs. You got Christian Watson. There is a ton of talent to work with. as far as receivers go. Then you look in the backfield, and this is where I think things can really get dictated in this matchup here. Whichever team's run defense steps up to the plate and slows the other team down, I think this is kind of where things get dictated, because whoever has the most balanced offense, in my opinion, probably comes out victorious in this one here. You look at the Texans, and I'm going to use just week 1 and 6 as the example, because that is when Joe Mixon is in the backfield for this Texans offense. They're averaging 202 rushing yards per game in week 1 and in week 6. The common denominator being that Joe Mixon played in both of those games, and I don't think that's just a coincidence. Then you look at the Packers, who this year, number 2 rushing attack in the league, period. Whether Jordan Love was in or Jordan Love was out, they have been able to run the football to the tune of about 162 yards per game on the ground. Josh Jacobs has been great for them and company there in that backfield. It really is about the offenses in this game. That being said, this game in Lambeau complicates it a little bit more, because Green Bay at home, Texans have to do the traveling. You're going all the way from the south, all the way up to the north of the country. So there is a lot of legwork involved for the Texans on their end here, going into a hostile environment like Green Bay. And I would say that, considering the division that Green Bay is in right now, they probably want to win this game and need to win this game a little bit more. You're sitting there at 4-2, with the Lions at 4-1, with the Vikings at 5-0, and the Bears at 4-2. Green Bay can't really afford to lose this. So there are some higher stakes, in my opinion. Whereas with the Texans, you got to be good in the AFC, because you're trying to get home field advantage. You don't want to be facing the Buffalo Bills or the Kansas City Chiefs or, the Baltimore Ravens at their home field come playoff time. Bigger picture in the AFC, you've got some juggernauts that you want to try to snatch home field from, and you only have one loss this year. So to stay in contention, you want to keep that loss number as low as possible. But your division is basically yours to lose. You're sitting comfortably at 5-1. The Colts are behind you at 3-3. The Titans and Jaguars can barely even buy a victory at this point. So I would say that coming into this game, you probably have the feeling that Green Bay may want this game just a little bit more. But the thing that I can't get away from, that I keep going back to when I was trying to decide on this game here, really comes down to the fact that Houston, in my opinion, has an overall better defense. And just those two guys, Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, like I mentioned earlier, are just so good at what they do in getting after the quarterback. Now, I will say there are some injury concerns that I have about the Texans coming into this game here. I'm looking at 6 different guys on the roster. 5 of them being defensive guys that have not participated in practice neither Wednesday or Thursday of this week, which could give the defense overall some issues going up against, again, one of the top offenses in the NFL right now in Green Bay. But I really do think the Texans have a shot to get this done. And the concerns about the leakiness of the Packers defense is something that I've been on all season. I can't go away from that at this point here. I'm going to take the Texans. I have them for a big W in Lambeau, 28-24. This is another one of those games. Everyone's touting Lions-Vikings as the game of the week. This one has a really good chance to be that same exact type of game. There's a lot on the line for both of these teams, and I think that both these teams in the positions that they are want to come out with wins. Again, Green Bay may need it just a little bit more, but I think the Texans, in the way that they're going right now with Joe Mixon back in the backfield behind CJ Stroud, I like Houston just a hair more. So give me the Texans 28-24. Now we'll take a look at a clash in the AFC North. The Cincinnati Bengals heading into Cleveland to take on the Browns. This being in Cleveland does make me worry a little bit for Cincinnati. Obviously, the Bengals have not been the team that everyone expected them to be coming into this year, but they have rattled off a couple of much-needed wins, and so that is good for them in that point of view. However, Joe Burrow, 1-5 versus Cleveland in his career, 0-3 in Cleveland as a whole. It's so scary to me because for whatever the reason it is, the Browns, no matter where they stood, have creamed Joe Burrow every single time they've gone against him. And for what it's worth, for all of Cleveland's struggles this season, they do still generate a ton of pressure over there. Now, to be fair, Bengals offensive line, pretty good unit themselves. They don't necessarily allow a ton of pressure on their end, but when you look at Cleveland, ranked 4th in pressure rate, and on top of that, they are 1st in the league in terms of time to pressure. They get after the quarterback and they make them uncomfortable. And Joe Burrow this year against pressure, he's been, I would say, good to maybe above average when you look at just his numbers overall. About 350 yards, just under, 3 touchdowns a pick, a passer rating of 100, averaging about 8.8 yards per attempt, but his completion percentage is at about 56%. So it's like give or take depending up on the day, but for whatever the reason it is, whenever he's facing Cleveland, things get uglier. So I'm thinking, okay, against that pressure, maybe we err on the uglier side of things. Nick Chubb is also set to make his debut, it sounds, going up against this same Bengals team, obviously coming back off of what was one of the craziest knee injuries I've ever seen in my life. And I can't believe his knee is still there. Like, that's the best way I can put that. Cincinnati's run defense has not been good, so if there was ever a defense for him to come back and play up against, this is the team to do it. They have the 6th most rushing yards per game allowed so far this season. They have the 7th worst run stuff rate in the league. If you wanted to pick a defense for Nick Chubb to ease his way back into, it's going to be this Bengals team that has struggled defensively all season in general, but has not been good against the run. Now, Cincinnati, for them, they've got to focus on locking down Deshaun Watson and what he's able to do. Fortunately for them, Deshaun Watson has not been great this season, and he has been really struggling to push the ball downfield, so defenses have been able to kind of key in on that and keep those short to intermediate throws more locked up than anything, and when he's going downfield, it doesn't really make you feel too good about things. And on top of that, Cleveland went and traded Amari Cooper away, so that makes things, I would argue, a little less difficult as far as from a defensive scheme point of view and who you have to take care of there. Obviously, you still have guys like David Njoku you got to deal with, but when you look at Next Gen Stats and some of the numbers they share here, Deshaun Watson completing just 15.8, so about 16% of his deep passes downfield. Cincinnati hasn't necessarily been great when it comes to going up against teams throwing short passes or quick passes, about 17th and 20th in terms of rank, respectively, for those two things here. The way I see it, the longer you can force Deshaun Watson to have to hold on to the football, the better off you are. Cleveland, on top of that, allowing a ton of sacks this year, most in the league. If you can just force him to hang on to that ball for that extra half second to a second or so, your guys like Trey Hendrickson should be able to get home, make him uncomfortable, or ultimately bring Watson down, and you can shut down this Browns offense through the air. That all being said, this is going to be an interesting game. I really don't know which way this is going to go, but I think it is time for Joe Burrow to finally get his win in Cleveland. The stars have aligned for that opportunity in this game here. If the offensive line can just keep the pressure at bay, for all the struggles that Cincinnati has had this year, offensively, defensively, they have not been as bad as the Browns have been. The Browns are in a really tough spot right now. It is not looking good for them going even from this point on and what we've seen from the first 6 weeks of them in the season. I'm going to take the Bengals. I don't think it's going to be a super high scoring game. I think the Bengals going up against a better defense, and they kind of went up again, for what it's worth, the Giants, for the struggles they've had. Pretty solid defense over there, but they ran into a pretty good defense over there. They only mustered 17 points in that Sunday night football game. So I like the Bengals 21-14. I think the Browns will find ways to move, but ultimately just the issues we've seen with Deshaun Watson and his struggles under center and just in the pocket overall do not really make me believe that the Browns are going to be winning that many more games this season unless a change gets made at the quarterback spot to help maybe spark a little bit of life in this offense. But I think I like the Bengals. I think I like Joe Burrow to get his first win in Cleveland and hopefully get that kind of monkey off his back type of deal with that victory. So I'll take Cincinnati. Not super confident on it because, again, that 1-5 versus Cleveland, 0-3 in Cleveland specifically really scares me. But it feels like everything has lined up for him to finally get that win in Cleveland. Next game, we have ourselves Tennessee going into Buffalo to take on the Bills. You could look at this as kind of a throwaway game, trap game type deal for the Bills. Like, the Bills should be coming into this game and winning, and probably winning fairly handedly. And I think if that's the way you're thinking, that's probably fair. Will Levis, not the answer in Tennessee. It feels like he's regressing. He has 7 interceptions through 5 games this season, not to mention the fumbles on top of that. And he only had 4 interceptions through the 9 games last year. Things are just getting ugly. Frustration seems to be brewing. Calvin Ridley was calling out the offense in an interview after last week's game. There are some injuries that are kind of littered around Buffalo, especially on the defensive side as a whole, that might have you a little bit concerned. Even guys that are playing, just how good are they actually feeling? How close to 100% are they actually? And that is something worth keeping an eye on in this matchup here. But when you look at Buffalo, I mean, they're averaging 27.5 points per game right now to Tennessee, who's averaging 19. And that number, in my opinion, is inflated because they've played one less game right now compared to the Buffalo Bills and just a lot of the other teams, because they're one of the very few teams that have had a bye so far this year. And then they have that random 31 points or whatever it was that they put up against Miami. So that number is honestly higher than I think it really should be. Like, I feel like their actual average minus Miami's probably closer to like 16 points a game, 17 points a game, which is not great. So you're looking at, like, in a realistic perspective, like a 10-point differential between these two teams. If Buffalo loses this game, it's completely them looking past Tennessee and onto whoever their next opponent is, and you're being caught by the trap game here. Buffalo went after Amari Cooper this week to try to bolster up the wide receiver room as well, so now you're looking at Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper, Dalton Kincaid. Like, you have so much to work with over there. There's no reason for Buffalo to lose this matchup. It would be a catastrophic type of loss for them to go down with a loss here, especially at home on top of that. Like, you're inviting Tennessee into your building. They better not be beating you here. I have the correct, and in my opinion, best case scenario for Buffalo. 37-13, big win. They beat down on a lesser opponent the way they have against Jacksonville Jaguars, another AFC South team in a very bad way themselves. That's the type of game that Buffalo should be having, and that's the type of game I expect hosting the Tennessee Titans in Buffalo. Now we'll take a look at a NFC. Oh, this is not the same division. I almost said NFC South clash here. No, just some birds in NFC fighting it up to see who can advance with another win this week. We got the Seahawks taking on the Atlanta Falcons. This one here, Seattle in a really tough spot. 3 straight losses after 3 straight wins. A lot of people questioning their legitimacy when they were 3-0 because of the opponents that they beat. And now back to back to back, just really tough losses here. They really need a victory to get their season back on track. However, they're going up against a Falcons team that's been really good against some stiff competition. They're 4-2. They've had some really heartbreaking losses on top of that. So the way I see it, Atlanta's battle tested, and they've been doing a really good job in getting wins, and if they're losing really tight contests. Seattle, on the other hand, just in a really tough way. Now, for Seattle, I think it's all about just keeping Geno Smith protected, and I think in this game, they have a really good chance in doing so. When Geno Smith's in a clean pocket, he's not facing pressure, he's got over 1,300 yards, he has a 97 passer rating, he's completing nearly 78% of his passes. He looks money when he's comfortable. It's when he's not comfortable that things really get ugly. His completion rate plummets below 50%. His passer rating's at 63. Funny enough, whether he's facing pressure or not, he has 3 touchdowns to 3 picks, either or. That's where his numbers are coming from. But beyond that, he is a much better quarterback when he's comfortable in that pocket. And the offensive line over there in Seattle has been struggling in pass protection. That being said, Atlanta, for what it's worth, is literally the worst pass rushing team, period. Like, it's not even up for discussion. They have the worst pressure rate in the league. They only have 5 sacks so far this season. They really cannot do much in terms of disrupting what quarterbacks do. And we've seen those struggles. That very issue came up when they were facing Tampa Bay on Thursday Night Football. So that is the big issue for Atlanta right now defensively. Seattle, in my opinion, has the opportunity to take advantage of that. That being said, Seattle's defense, they've been decimated by injuries for the last handful of weeks, and I really think that's what's been hurting this team the most. Their defense sitting at 9th most points per game allowed at 25, 7th most rushing yards per game at about 145 a game. They're tied for 10th in the league in passing touchdowns as well, so they've kind of struggled in all facets of the game. I will say that they're starting to get healthier, and that is a positive step in the direction. but they do have their hands full. Atlanta now in back-to-back weeks has proven that they can run the football effectively if given the opportunity to the tune of nearly 200 yards last week against Carolina. And Kirk Cousins had 500 yards passing in that game against Tampa Bay. Granted, in overtime, he had the opportunity to rack up some extra yards. But if not, you're probably looking at like 450 and some change. So you will have your hands full in Seattle. You've just got to hope that the guys that you have coming back, and even some of those guys that are currently not participating in practice, you're looking at like Trey Brown, Tariq Woolen, and then you also have Byron Murphy that are all listed on there as guys that have not either been participating in practice or were limited. You have to hope that those guys either get to the game, or whoever doesn't get to the game, or does get to the game rather, is as close to 100% as possible if they're not. But that is probably my biggest concern right now, is just the health of Seattle's defense has really been killing them, especially over the last 3 weeks where these injuries really started to ramp up. Both these teams' defenses have shown their weaknesses, and we've mentioned a lot of them here. They've allowed some points at times. I do think, though, like I mentioned when I first started, the stiff competition that Atlanta has faced and how competitive they've been against that stiff competition helps me lean a little bit more so in their direction. On top of that, with Seattle coming to Atlanta to play, this is one of the furthest travel distances, not including games going out to London, that you can possibly face in a week going from Seattle to Atlanta. I don't know what the flight time is for that. I kind of wish I looked it up. I didn't even think to do that, but now that I'm talking about it, I wish I did. But you're literally talking a team that's in like the very tip of the Northwest, going all the way down to the southeastern part of the country to face off. You really cannot travel that much further. The only further you're looking at is like facing a team that's in Florida, like the Miami Dolphins. I think that's like the furthest travel distance you can actually get. So it's going to be a long trip. It's a tough opponent who's faced a lot of tough opponents and been really competitive in Atlanta. I think I like the Falcons, and I have them winning 24-20. I think the defense hangs on. There could be a little bit more in terms of scoring here. I wouldn't be shocked if it ends up being one of those games where both teams are pushing closer to 30, but I do think that the long trip maybe slows down Seattle's offense a little bit, and Atlanta doesn't have to go as crazy offensively themselves to pull off the win here. Next, we have the Carolina Panthers and the Washington Commanders. The game that I get to pick every single week and basically just kind of talk for a little bit about some stuff, but you already know what my decision's going to be here. And this week I decided to just put some numbers together to just rattle off to you all before I make the pick here. Washington coming in, poised to have a great bounce back game against the Carolina Panthers after a loss to Baltimore. Carolina's defense is allowing the 10th most passing and 3rd most rushing yards per game allowed, and currently the only team above 30 points per game allowed at about 34, almost 34. It's not exactly. Washington's offense is 3rd in points per game scored right now, 5th in yards per attempt, the 5th most rushing yards per game, and they currently have, with Jaden Daniels, the 4th fastest time to throw, so they are getting the ball out quickly when they are throwing that ball. Now, Washington's defense could make this game a little bit interesting because they're not necessarily the best. They are currently allowing 11th in points per game allowed, 11th in total yards per game allowed, so Carolina could find a little bit of offensive success and push the score of this game a little bit higher. You also have an interesting stat that I pulled from Next Gen Stats here. I love NFL Pro because they give you some really awesome, like in-depth numbers that you wouldn't know otherwise unless they share it with you. But per Next Gen Stats, Washington allows the highest completion rate in man coverage this season. They have the 10th highest man coverage rate overall as far as use in terms of defenses. Andy Dalton versus man coverage this year has a 72.5% completion rate, which actually leads the league. So again, all things considered, there is an opportunity for the passing attack to be successful and even the rushing attack from Carolina to be successful. Carolina running back, and again, per next gen stats here on this one too, Carolina's running back, Chuba Hubbard, is averaging 7.9 yards per attempt on runs that go outside the offensive tackles, which is actually the best in the NFL. Washington is allowing 5.9 yards per attempt on those same outside runs, which is 2nd most in the league. Carolina does come in extremely hurt. Washington is the better team here, at least offensively, but Washington's defense has been suspect. That is definitely something I can't shy away from. I think we see a lot of points. I think if you're looking at and again, I'm not a betting person, but if you are looking at over-unders, this is a game that you'd probably want to consider the over in. I like the Commanders. Big win. I have them winning 38-20. The Carolina Panthers might even get more than that. 38-27. We just see a lot of points, not too much defense, and it's just offense the whole way. I would not be surprised the way this game is matching up because Carolina's defense as a whole, injured, battered, bruised, whatever you want to say about it, they can't really stop anyone right now. And Washington themselves have been letting a lot of teams move. And again, with those next-gen stat numbers I gave you right there, there's a good chance that Carolina's seeing those same things, and that's going to be what they're trying in this game here. So give me the Commanders, a lot of points in this one, fun offensive game. Next, we look at the Raiders going into Los Angeles to take on the Rams. The Raiders going back to L.A. We have the Rams getting Cooper Kupp back this week, and I think that is going to be huge for this team going forward. Not having Cooper Kupp has been killing them, and he will be a welcome return addition to this offense. The Las Vegas offense last week against Pittsburgh basically looked all but dead in the water. The Rams defense, thankfully, is nowhere near the level of Pittsburgh's defense, so that should bode well for Las Vegas here, as the Rams are currently allowing the 4th most points per game and 5th most yards per game total this season. However, I am really concerned about the direction that this Raiders team is currently heading in right now. There's now conversation after Devontae Adams left, being traded away over to the Jets, that there's potential that even maybe Max Crosby gets moved now as well. And his comments that he had in an interview is definitely kind of, it's not helping matters, I guess you could say. But the way I see it, if the Raiders want to win this game, you got to protect the football and just take care of it offensively. You can't put it in bad spots, but you've got to find a way, and you've got to get, and I don't even doubt Max Crosby because this is what he does. He's a game wrecker through and through, regardless of the situation, but you've got to get him ready to go to get after Matthew Stafford this week. Under pressure this season, Matthew Stafford has actually not been great. Now, granted, the pressure has been a little bit crazy for him this year because how battered the O-line was coming out of the gates early in the season, and still kind of is, but when you look at the numbers here, he's currently sitting on a 48% completion rate with a 51 passer rating when he's facing pressure, and he has no touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Much better quarterback when he's not dealing with that pressure, but he has really struggled. Las Vegas is about average in terms of pressure this year. They need Max Crosby to be all in on this game if they want to have any shot at slowing down the Rams. The way I see the Rams kind of handling this defense in Las Vegas, they're probably going to try to get the ball moving with Kyren Williams, start out running the ball because they really want to open up the play action and be able to hit guys like Cooper Kupp in stride for big plays, getting the defense to bite. The reason I say that is because when you see the way Matthew Stafford has played ever since 2018 when they started tracking these stats here, this is the highest use of play action that Matthew Stafford has seen in his career this season. Las Vegas allows the 10th most rushing yards per game. If you can beat up on that run defense a little bit, open up that play action, I wouldn't be shocked to see a big 20, maybe 30-yard rip here or there from Cooper Kupp as he comes back for his first game since, did he even, I don't even remember if he played so far this season. Let me know in the comments section there. I can't remember if he's played or not this year, or if he's been hurt since before the start of the season, but let me know. I am excited to see some Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford again, and we are not too far away on top of that from a Puka Nacua return, and the Rams' fortunes could potentially turn around. I like the Rams in this game here, especially in LA. Like I said, the direction that the Raiders are heading in right now does not feel good to me, and there's definitely a possibility they win. That's always a possibility, but I'm leaning Rams pretty heavily on this. 28-17, getting Cooper Kupp back, I think, is going to be something that really tips the scales in the Rams' favor, not in just this game, but for their season going forward. Now we have, this is another game, like this is a loaded weekend of games. I cannot stress this enough. Another big matchup here that has game of the week potential. We're looking at the Kansas City Chiefs heading into San Francisco to take on the 49ers. Kansas City has been one of the most consistent and successful offenses this season. And that's not something you're hearing a lot of people say. They don't have the explosiveness that they typically have, even though Xavier Worthy has made some big plays here and there. And people are looking at the Chiefs' offense like it's down and out. However, according to Next Gen Stats, in terms of just overall offensive success rate, which is successful plays being made each and every single offensive snap, they are second only to Detroit, as they find success on about 50% of their plays. So every other play, they're going for positive yardage, they're going for positive results, they're making things happen. This is not some overly explosive offense in Kansas City, but they're doing the little things and getting the job done when they need to. San Francisco's going to need to be at their best defensively to slow this Kansas City team. Not necessarily slow them down, because again, they're not a super high flight offense, but just keep them in check and not allow them to kind of just slowly work their way up and down the field like they kind of have been this season before they finally hit you with like a dagger here or there to Worthy or somebody else that's on that roster there. They've got to be at their best, and I think they really need to focus in on winning on third down. They currently rank 23rd in the league on third down defense, allowing teams to convert at a rate of about 43%. So they've got to tighten up there. You got to win on those crucial conversion downs like third. Got to make sure you stop them there. For the Chiefs defensively, I really think it's going to come down to just keeping Brock Purdy in check. Currently, right now, as it stands, San Francisco is staring down at Isaac Guerendo being their starting running back. So their running back 3 is going to be their running back 1 this weekend, it looks like. But Brock Purdy's been the guy who's been wheeling and dealing on this offense as the running backs have just kind of continued to work their way out of the field of play. You look at where they stand right now with Purdy, he's sitting on 1,600 yards. He has 9 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, a 100 passer rating, a completion percentage around 65%. He's averaging nearly 9 yards per attempt right now on his throwing. Kansas City's passing defense hasn't really been great, so there is an opportunity that we could see maybe a little bit of success out of the San Francisco 49ers, just airing the ball out. Kansas City ranks 19th in overall pass defense efficiency per Next Gen Stats, and on top of that, they've allowed the 13th most passing yards per game allowed, the 5th lowest sack rate. They have their 12th in pressure rate. So the defense, especially against the pass, has not been quite where it needs to be. And one thing to really keep in mind here, and again, this is another one of those things where NFL Pro gives you some really interesting just numbers, and they have these little cards of information that I love looking at, and you find out all kinds of really interesting stuff. San Francisco's wide receivers love to face press coverage. Absolutely love it. And for Kansas City to win, they've got to be able to beat them at the line of scrimmage and knock them off their routes. And for San Francisco to win, their wide receivers have got to beat that press coverage here. The reason I bring all this up is because Kansas City's outside corners have played press on 51.2% of their snaps this season, which is 10% higher than the team behind them. So the team behind them sitting at only 41. That being said, San Francisco's wide receivers lead the league in yards gained versus press at 484 total yards. They've also faced the second highest rate of press coverage, but that is something to note. Kansas City, a team that loves to push their corners, especially on the outside, right up on those receivers, who finds a lot of success doing that, is going up against the team whose wide receivers find a lot of success facing that style of defense here. So that could be a schematic type of mismatch for this Kansas City Chiefs offense. But it's one of those things where we're going to find out just who is actually that much better than the other at what they're doing here, because those two things match up so well. So I'm really excited to see how that plays itself out. There are some key injuries to watch on this one here, especially on the 49ers end here. I'm looking at specifically a guy like Jawan Jennings, who has not participated in the last couple of games. It's interesting to me that the third wide receiver on the 49ers is a big deal to talk about, but Jawan Jennings has been money for this 49ers team, and I don't think we can really ignore that anymore. He has probably been the most productive wide receiver for San Francisco at this point. So for him to not be practicing at all this week, that is definitely something to keep an eye on there. I think that one's important. But you're also looking at some other guys that are limited, like Deebo Samuels is on here. You also, of course, have Jordan Mason, who's been limited. Whether he plays or not is still up in the air. Defensive tackle Jordan Elliott, defensive tackle Malik Collins, and defensive tackle Kevin Givens. You're looking at 3 guys on the interior, all either limited or not participating in practice. Definitely stuff to keep in mind, because they could be thin on the interior there. And with Kareem Hunt now in Kansas City, that is also something to consider. As for who I think is going to win after that nice long breakdown of Chiefs 49ers, I am leaning I almost just lied to you guys. I'm leaning Kansas City in this game here. I almost did pick San Francisco, and that should tell you exactly why that almost just slipped out of my mouth there. I was leaning San Francisco basically up until I sat down to record this with you all. I really thought, there's a good chance San Francisco gets the job done. You have to travel all the way into San Fran from Kansas City to get this game going here with the Chiefs. But I really feel like the current situation that Kansas City is facing, aside from just the wide receiver room being up in the air, they're still doing Kansas City things. They're still an effective offense. The defense is still really good. And yeah, they do have some deficiencies here and there, but they play up against their opponents every single week, and they do a great job of matching up their guys on their opponents' guys. And I have such a hard time picking against Kansas City. And the other thing is that I look at San Francisco and just some of the losses that they have. Their loss to the Rams, their loss to the Arizona Cardinals. I know they're division rivals, but losing 2 games the way they did that they just should not be losing. If you're a top flight team, you're not losing those games. And the way I see it, Kansas City, they've had some of those same tight contests, maybe even with lesser opponents, but they're winning those games. So I'm leaning Kansas City 26-23. I think it's going to be tight. No one's running away with anything. It's going to come down to the wire. You're going to be sweating the whole game, but I do like the Chiefs for the W. Now we can take a look at Sunday Night Football with the New York Jets and Pittsburgh Steelers. Can the addition of Davante Adams save the Jets season here? Russell Wilson could be taking over at quarterback for Pittsburgh as well. Mike Tomlin refuses to tell anyone what exactly we're going to see at quarterback, but we'll see what happens here. First thing I'm looking at is the offensive lines, because both of these offensive lines have their own type of situations going on right now, but are both not necessarily performing at the best in terms of pass protection. Both teams sitting on 16 sacks allowed. I look at the Jets, and for what it's worth, they put in so much money to retool this offensive line, and for them to be sitting in a spot where they are like average to below average in pass protection still is not where this unit needs to be. They've got to figure something out there, because I feel like I'm watching Rodgers get clean clocked from the back and not even know that the guys are coming at him, and you just can't have that happening. You cannot have that happening, especially from your blind side. And Tyron Smith, great left tackle, don't get me wrong, big respect to that guy because he's been doing it for a long time. But there have been some moments this season where he looks like Tyron Smith in 2024, if you get what I'm saying with that. So that is definitely something that concerns me. And then on top of that, you look at the fact that Alex Highsmith is set to potentially make his return this week, and it sounds like the expectation is he will. If he's going to be back, he's the running mate of TJ Watt. He is basically the Robin to his Batman, and with those two guys coming after Aaron Rodgers from either side, if TJ Watt's eating up all the attention, Alex Highsmith will more than certainly feast. That is going to be a big problem for the Jets to deal with. Now, on the Steelers side of things, like I mentioned, they're not doing too hot themselves, but a lot of that has to do with the injuries. You have Nick Frazier. He's not practicing so far this week. On top of that, we've seen other guys go down as well. This team is in a spot where if they were healthier on the offensive line, I probably wouldn't feel as concerned, but with Nick Frazier down, you lost Troy Fautanu weeks ago. Like, you have a really good pass rush in the New York Jets coming at you this week. You're going to have your hands full, and you're going to have to play your absolute best game. One thing I'm looking at as far as dictating this matchup is concerned, who wins on the ground. The reason I bring that is because neither one of these teams technically has a run success rate over 40%. The Steelers are just below at 39.7. Jets are sitting at 37.7, but that's basically 2 in every 5 runs are successful for both of these teams is where that number kind of stands. When you look at the Jets' run defense, they're about average to slightly below. They're sitting at 16th in yards per game allowed, but their run stuff rate, they're not really stopping people at the line of scrimmage or behind. There's 27th in the league. Now, Pittsburgh, on the other hand, they don't let people run too much. They don't really let them run effectively. They're one of the lowest in the league in terms of yards per attempt allowed. They are 4th in yards per game allowed. They are 6th in run stuff rate. This is a tough unit to run against. Whoever can find some steady success running the football on the ground, I think will do a really good job of controlling this game, where both these teams have not necessarily been top flight passing offenses, despite this, the Jets having Aaron Rodgers, but now trading for Davante Adams. That could potentially change, but I don't think it's going to change in 1 week. That's one of those things I think it's going to take a little bit of time for it to really get going again, unless they just go right back to it, which I guess wouldn't surprise me, but I think in a realistic sense, it might take Adams and Rodgers a week or two to really get back to doing what they were doing in Green Bay, since they've been away from each other for a bit. So realistically, whoever controls the ball on the ground controls the tempo of the game. Both these teams have good defenses, and when you have strong run games with a good defense backing you up, you can win a lot of football games that way. I do have that big question on whether swapping from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson is going to kill the Steelers here, and that kind of actually helped sway my decision and who I thought was going to win this game here. Justin Fields has 10 touchdowns total to just one singular turnover and 1,300 yards total between the air and ground. I don't know why this is really happening. I understand the promise that you don't lose your spot to an injury, and maybe the offense hasn't necessarily been great, like Mike Tomlin said, but they've been winning football games. And I feel like if you've been winning games, you got to stick with what's working. I really, really hope that Russell Wilson is the better option and it ends up working out in the long run. But I was really enjoying the Justin Fields Pittsburgh Steelers era because it's just been such a surprise to watch. And it's honestly gone a lot better than I think a lot of people anticipated. The fact that he's sitting on one turnover right now and he's having his career season and he's being benched because someone's coming back for injury that hasn't taken a snap for you yet in a regular season game, just saying that out loud doesn't sit right to me. I'm going Jets in this game. I have them winning 23-20, and in part because there's a piece of me that feels like this might bite the Steelers in the ass. I really hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't agree with this. I'm not a head coach, though, so what do I know? Like, who am I to question Mike Tomlin's decision? But that's just how I feel. I really hope that Russell Wilson winds up thriving in this offense. You do have some great guys to work with and skilled players like George Pickens, like Pat Freiermuth, like Najee Harris, and now Jalen Warren, who's back from injury too. So maybe it works itself out, but I don't really agree with this decision here, and I don't like I'm worried about it. But I'll take the Jets 23-20. If we were just going Justin Fields, no drama, I think I'd be more inclined to lean Steelers on that one, especially being at home. The next game, we're moving into the Monday night doubleheader. We have ourselves the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And for this one, both of these defenses sit in the top 5 of passing yards per game allowed. I think we're going to see a lot of air yards in this game. Baltimore is the league's best run defense, though, whereas Tampa Bay, they've been able to establish a strong rushing attack the last 3 weeks, culminating in a 277-yard performance last week against New Orleans. But they have a tough test against that Baltimore run defense here. I think that Baltimore, specifically their secondary, they're going to have their work cut out for them because they have Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, who leads the NFL in yak right now with 335 yards and both guys having 5 touchdowns. Going to be a pair of guys that are going to be tough to deal with, tough to work around, but you have to find a way to contain them. I know Tampa Bay's been finding that success on the ground. I don't really think that's going to be the same case against this Ravens defense, to be completely honest. They are a tough unit there, but I do like the opportunity that they have to maybe see and prove to themselves if they've found something or if this was just a product of like the run defenses you were facing. Can Tampa Bay slow down Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson is another question that I was kind of sitting on as I was going through this game here. I mean, you look at what Derrick Henry's been doing. He leads the league in yards right now with 704 on the ground. 5.9 yards per attempt puts him third to only Lamar Jackson, hilariously enough, and Tank Bigsby, who we talked about earlier, off of 114 rushing attempts. He's got 8 touchdowns to boot on top of that. And per Next Gen Stats, Tampa Bay ranks 28th versus designed runs and 28th in overall run defense efficiency. We all know Baltimore loves scheming up those runs, and I think Tampa Bay is going to have they're going to have quite a day trying to deal with whatever Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are trying to do because no one really seems to have an answer yet, and every single week it feels like Baltimore is getting better and better and better at this Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry 1-2 punch thing. There are some injuries just worth keeping a note of here. As of Thursday, Mike Evans did not participate, and you also have Jamel Dean, who did not participate in practice as well, so a couple of guys worth keeping an eye on there. Graham Barton, the center, was also limited for Tampa Bay, and then on the Ravens side, we do have cornerback Arthur Millette, who's listed on here. We also have Brent Urban, the defensive end, and then Deontay Hardy, the wide receiver, which not the biggest of deals, but it is something to keep in mind because the wide receiver room is not thin, but not deep in Baltimore, if that makes sense. So just knowing that they're probably going to be a little bit thinner potentially than typical in the wide receiver room is something to keep an eye on there. But I mean, you have Rashad Bateman, you still have Zay Flowers. Obviously, those are your guys, and you run a lot of tight end or multiple tight end sets too. Not a super big thing, but just stuff to keep an eye on there. I think we're going to get a lot of points in this one. I really do. Both these defenses have been suspect in their own ways. I don't really believe in Tampa Bay's defense at all, to be completely honest with you. I feel like they let teams move a lot, whether it's on the ground or through the air. And while Baltimore can shut down a run game, they will let teams throw. And we saw that against Cincinnati. I think we get a high-scoring contest, but I think Baltimore comes in and gets the win in Tampa Bay 38-35 for a big W. And then to wrap up the weekend's games, we got the Chargers going into Arizona to take on the Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals, going to be tasked with stopping Chargers running back J.K. Dobbins, who's been averaging 5.4 yards per attempt. He's 7th in yards totaled, and then 6th in rushing yards over expected this season here. Arizona's defense ranking inside the top 5 or inside the top 5 or 10 in most rushing numbers allowed. So definitely going to be a tough task here. The Arizona defense has not been great this year. We've talked a lot about just the lack of talent that they have on that side of the football. Chargers themselves got to make sure they're spying Kyler Murray. I'm really interested in who's going to be tasked with doing so. If they're going to have a guy like Derwin James maybe follow him around in the defense, or if maybe one of the linebackers in like Denzel Perriman or Dayan Henley are going to have to go after him, or maybe it's a mix of them, whoever it may be. I'm really hoping for the Chargers' sake, Joey Bosa is able to come back in this one. He hasn't played since I believe week 3, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully he can come back in and help fortify that defensive front, help keep contained with Khalil Mack on the other side, because that is kind of the biggest thing right now with Arizona. They're 2-4, don't get me wrong. They've had some bad games, but when they're playing well and they're winning games, it's typically because Kyler Murray is giving defenses one hell of a time trying to keep him in check and not let him break off these big runs where he's averaging nearly 10 yards per rush. So that is the big thing for the Chargers. Really hope Joey Bosa is back here. And then realistically, I look at just how good the Chargers offensive line is, and when I like I just mentioned, Arizona's a bit talent depleted as far as the defensive side of the football goes. Now that you have Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt back in the mix, that O-line is so good over there. And Arizona's bottom 5 in pressure rate, bottom 10 in sacks and sack rate. When Justin Herbert's not feeling that pressure, he has 600 yards, 4 touchdowns passing, a 115 passer rating, averaging 8 yards per attempt and completing 75% of his passes. If they can't make him uncomfortable and they can't beat that tough unit on that offensive line, I don't really see what the avenue is for Arizona to win this football game, because Chargers have been a pretty good run defense on top of that, and that's kind of been like the one really good thing. And with Marvin Harrison Jr.'s status up in the air as well, Arizona's coming into this game hurting, not in the best position, and the Chargers kind of had their bye week at the perfect opportunity considering the health situation they were in. It seems like the ankle with Justin Herbert's fine. I like the Chargers in Arizona. I'm taking them 27-17. Good, comfortable victory for them there. If the Arizona Cardinals win, I would be kind of shocked, but it's the NFL, so anything can happen. But I think the Chargers come away. Defense stifles them 27-17. Good, comfortable win for the Chargers as they move on to 4-2, make that record look a little bit better. But those are my picks for this week going into the NFL. Comment down below. Let me hear your picks, your thoughts on this weekend's slate of games. Who do you like? Who do you not like? I don't gamble, but if you have some gambling bets you want to talk, that you want to just throw in that comment section, people love doing that too. I invite that as well. I love the conversation. I just don't do it myself. But that is it for me. As always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll catch you all next time. Have a good one.